Hello, welcome to Be Well. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very excited for the topic and the guest that we have. Today, we're going to honor the 75th anniversary of Jackie Robinson, breaking the color barrier in baseball. That will happen tomorrow, April 15th, and I feel very fortunate to have our guest here today to be able to elaborate really on the impact that Jackie Robinson had on the game at that point in time and how that has sustained to today and is even furthered. If I may, I want to start with a quote from Jackie Robinson. And he had said, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives." And that is a truly profound statement, especially for someone who is so accomplished in his endeavors, and really a selfless statement in terms of what was most important to him. I am very fortunate to have our guest today, honored to introduce to you Reggie Smith. Reggie, thank you for being here.
Jonathan, thanks for having me.
I want to provide, it may be a lengthy introduction, but I just need to spend a moment here. Reggie Smith spent 17 seasons in the major leagues, 1966 through 1982, 8 seasons with the Boston Red Sox, 6 with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Many, myself as well, but many more qualified than me, would say that he had a Hall of Fame career and should have been in the Hall 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Reggie went on to coach with the Dodgers with Tommy Lasorda, coach USA Baseball, Pan Am Games, Olympics, World Cup Baseball, World Baseball Classic. More recently, you may have seen Dodger manager Dave Roberts asked Reggie to have him join the coaching staff for last year's All-Star game with Doc and Buddy Black. Reggie has continued to contribute to baseball with his baseball academy up in Los Angeles. And again, I am just so honored, Reggie, that you're joining us on this occasion to be able to share about the impact of this date that we're going to be honoring tomorrow with Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. So I will let you start wherever you like in terms of the impact of that day, in terms of Jackie Robinson coming into Major League Baseball.
Well, first of all, thank you again for having me and letting me share not only my memories of Jackie, but more importantly, the social impact that his breaking the color barrier, being able to come into Major League Baseball, and in particular, in any sport for that matter, because we often speak of sports being a microcosm of life and the things that we do, the impact that sports have on people and that it has on society. So when you look at the impact of Jackie coming into Major League Baseball when he did, and at that time, and ultimately the wagon that he was able to pull for Black players, African-American players coming afterwards, he also set a standard at that time for everyone in terms of the impact that it had on how we interacted with each other, especially as it related to a collective form of being together. Sure, whites and blacks had worked together in other industries, but there was always that separation there. But when you're talking about a team sport, like the way everyone has to pull on the same end of the rope, and how it's achieved still individually, collectively, it was tremendous. And the fact that Jackie showed that in spite of all of the negative things that were heaped upon him and sent his way, that he could overcome. he could overcome that it represented in something that we did learn about him. And I still say it to this day, baseball is what I did, it's not who I am. Jackie was a man amongst men. He was an example, and if there ever was anyone that you could say that I wanted to be like or to copy and consider a hero, Jackie was that person.
Well, that's a powerful statement in terms of how you hold him. I can't really even imagine someone at that point in time breaking into baseball, and just as you said, the challenges, the discrimination that may have been hurled on him, and how to separate that out and as you said, play the game is really hard to even imagine.
Well, it's difficult because, you know, we all have feelings, and sometimes words can hurt, can have an effect on that way. You know, that old saying, sticks and stones might break my bones, but words will never hurt. Well, those words do hurt sometimes. And the tendency to express that hurt in those feelings manifest themselves in different ways, you know, from a physical response or a mental one. And if it's done mentally, you know, you keep it inside, and that can hurt. You have a physical one to where you either fight back or you exhibit extraordinary talent and abilities on the baseball field. And that's how Jackie exhibited his for all of us that came after him to how we should conduct ourselves, because he knew that there was a tremendous burden on him to somehow or another, again, pass through that, because it was like baseball was what he did. It wasn't who he was. The man that he was, to be able to do that was definitely reflective of, again, who he was and what he was. And it didn't matter what color he was.
How did he carry himself in the game at that point in time as he first came into Major League Baseball? Was he integrated into the team? Was he, you know, kind of doing his thing? You and I spoke a few moments ago about that team concept and what's most important. But what's your understanding or recollection of how he was part of that team?
Well, it like anything else, there are prejudices, there are stigmatisms, and that existed, and there were players that didn't want him there regardless of his ability. And that's born out of ignorance and stupidity that it existed. And then when the realization that, well, he's here, he's going to be here, well, he still had to earn his way and prove that he could play. And then it became the expectation of what it should have been all along, was just that. Can he play? Can he do the things on that field that's going to help us be successful as a team? And eventually the players saw that he had that ability, and it became, okay, we're playing for the name across the front of your chest, not the one on the back. And it didn't matter. So as players started to see that he had that ability, then there was shame that some of the players had to deal with. And there's a difference between shame and stigmatism, and you can't confusing the two there. So once that kicked in, it became a matter of everyone doing the right thing at that moment, and to, hey, that's our teammate. He has on the same color uniform we have on today.
I love that. I hadn't heard you speak of the standard that he set, and whether for those that followed, and whether that was articulated or whether that was modeled and kind of understood. whether he would pull other players aside and mentor them in some way. What's your thought?
He did, especially when you start to look at the players that came after him, from Don Newcomb to Joe Black to Roy Campanella, and others that followed, that came along after. Many of them had experience in the Negro leagues, but it was different to an extent, and now they were showing their ability and had to show their abilities, and at a very high level at the major leagues, to continue to bring others into the game. And Ray, actually, they raised the level of play at that time in terms of his excitement and the expectations. So it was good and bad. Good from the standpoint that the players were able to do these things, and it was bad because the expectations that everyone that came along afterwards had to be as good, if not better. So that standard was set, and to be able to achieve that, oftentimes it was said, coming along as a young player, well, you have to be twice as good as that white player. And that in itself was a motivator to get there, because you still had to, in the 60s, early 60s, there were still some remnants of the old Jim Crow things that were still in place, not being able to stay in certain hotels, eat in restaurants, and different things like that some of us experienced. But thankful that we were still able to make it, and getting to the major leagues, it helped to know that there were still people around that had experienced that treatment, and knew that there was someone there that had your back and could share the same experiences with you, that you weren't alone, you weren't by yourself.
Yeah, that is obviously so helpful, because it's an isolated individual experience that you might have, yet to be able to share that with others in terms of how they may have dealt with it, how they encountered it. So Reggie, when you came up into baseball, I know you had met Jackie, and he may have pulled you aside and had a conversation. So I'm curious about what that exchange may have been, as well as what it was like for you coming into baseball, because it wasn't that far after Jackie.
Well, my experience maybe like and maybe unlike a lot of young Black players at that time. I actually experienced hearing about it and learning about a lot that was going on, because at age 15, I was playing with professional players, guys that were in the old Negro leagues, had played. And in 1960, I was 15 years old. And like I said, I was playing with these guys that were coming back during the off season from games, because the Negro Leagues didn't completely fold until, I believe, 1961, 62, okay, and they played the last games at that time. So players would barnstorm. They would come out west, and they would travel around, and they would play exhibition, and they would play games against the local teams and so forth. And so I wound up getting an opportunity through Chet Brewer, who was a great Negro League pitcher at that time with the Kansas City Monarchs. And when they would come west, instead of saying the Kansas City, they would be the Royals. So I got to play with the Royals when I was 15 years old. And in the process of doing that, I was exposed to a lot of these great Negro League players at that time to learn the game, learn how to play the game, and at the same time hearing about a lot of the, not only the players, the great players of the Negro Leagues at that time, but those players that had gotten opportunities to go and play in the major leagues. So hearing that, it was an awesome tutorial for me to learn what the expectations were for me to be able to progress and hopefully move through a minor league system and get to the major leagues. And because of that experience, at 18 years old, I probably had more experience playing at a higher level against guys that were professional, that by the time I was 18 years old, when I ultimately was taken in the Rule 5 draft by the Red Sox, I had a major league contract when I was 18 years old.
Wow. I'm just thinking, being 15 and playing with major leaguers in the Negro League, it just, what exposure that would be. I mean, I think of when I was 15, and just, the maturation that provided with elders kind of teaching and showing you, as well as competing against you. But what a wonderful tutelage, as well as a quickening in terms of bringing you up into the game.
Well, it was through that to expand and continue the original question in the fact that finally getting to meet Jackie, and that's who was my boyhood hero, because the only disappointment was not seeing him come west when the Dodgers came to Los Angeles from Brooklyn. I really got to miss seeing Jackie play and having idolized him and having a chance to hear these old Negro League players talk about him, but just my parents and other members of the family talk about Jackie, and then listening to games on the radio or getting a chance to see him on television during the World Series. Well, when they didn't come west because they had traded him to the Giants before they moved out here in '58, and Roy, having had the accident, those are two people that we looked up to at that time. But ultimately, what wound up happening after seeing the Dodgers play here and having gotten to the major leagues, I believe it was either like 1970, 1971, the proposal was put forth to play a Martin Luther King game at Dodger Stadium, and many of the major league players were asked to participate in it, particularly the Black players in both the American and National League, but as well as many of the white players that played. Many of the greats participated in this event at Dodger Stadium, and I was fortunate enough at that time, being a young player with the Red Sox, to get an invitation to play in that game, and and being picked on the side to play, because in that lineup I was in there with Mays and Frank Robinson, a lot of great players in that lineup. We got to play against other players at that time, and it was during the introduction that it first came out, and we had all heard that, well, Jackie's going to be here, and it was like, wow, and they were going to wheel Roy Campanella out, and as that was an opportunity that had always wanted to be able to meet Jack. And he came out and he went down, as he was going down the line, shaking hands with everyone, and that was it. Now after the game was over, players were flying back to their teams, and just so happened I was going to rejoin the Red Sox in New York to play against the Yankees. Now I'm on the plane and I'm sitting in an aisle seat, and we're Just I'm sitting there waiting, and all of a sudden I see Jackie board the plane. And at that time, he was still having a little trouble seeing because of the diabetes that he had. And he had this young man in front of him that this was kind of his assistant. Well, they were walking back and they were getting closer and closer to where I was sitting in the plane. And sure enough, the attendant turns and goes in and sits next to the window. I'm in an aisle seat, and Jackie comes in and he sits in the aisle seat right directly across from me. Now, I'm sitting there, and that's why I identify with young kids sometimes when they meet a baseball player, meet their baseball hero, something how shy and how timid they could be. And I became that kid in that moment, in mustering the courage to speak to him and formally introduce myself, and I did. I said, "Hello, Mr. Robinson," and Reggie Smith. I play with the Boston Red Sox, and he turned to me and looked at me. He says, "I know who you are, and I like what you stand for and what you represent," and that meant so much to me that my boyhood hero knew who I was and had just told him that, yeah, I follow you with the Red Sox and everything. And pretty much everything after that went blank. Jackie knows me. And this is something that I still take with me to this day, that I feel so much pride in, that a lot of the things that I did and the way that I wanted to play the game, and the things that the expectations that I had in uniform and off the field, that I like to say that they were formulated in my mind as the path that I wanted to follow.
Reggie, that's such a beautiful validation of you, as well as maybe even kind of passing the mantle in some ways for you to carry forth exactly what you said, what you took from Jackie and how you wanted to play the game and the contribution that you wanted to make. That is really a beautiful exchange that you shared. And I was feeling the electricity when you were talking about, Jackie's here, he's going to be in the stadium. And then as he's walking down the aisle, you took me to that experience. So thank you for sharing that with me.
Pleasure. Yes, it was the excitement and the electricity of it. It was palpable.
Reggie, if I could have you go a little bit, I want, if you're open to it, just sharing your experience in baseball. And racism was prolific, during the 60s and the civil rights. And I just wonder what you may want to share in terms of how you managed and took it on and dealt with it.
It was tough. I did experience it, especially my first year in pro ball, being able, my parents tried to warn me that if things hadn't changed, and I'm thinking in 1962, oh yes they have, and I grew up here in California, so getting on the plane, flying to Tennessee, because I had to fly into Kingsport, Tennessee, through Cincinnati, and trying to get a cab, and that didn't work. And then eventually going into Bristol, getting a cab into Bristol, Tennessee, to where I was supposed to catch a Greyhound bus to the little town Whitfield, Virginia, where I was. And that, like I said, it was, first of all, trying to get information. I'm 18-year-old kid, away from home, taking all my luggage around and experiencing these different things, going into a Rexall drugstore to have lunch. And then after eating, having the waitress break the plate that I'd eaten out of, and still dealing with that, and still having enough time before the bus came, and had, to be at the bus station to pick me up, to go to the movies, and having to go upstairs and sit, and I'm boiling inside all the way. I'm angry. Yeah, to getting on the bus, going into Whitfield, taking my luggage with me to the hotel and being told I can't stay there. We don't have room for you. To having some of the guys and one other kid that I had known and played ball with out here, who had also signed with the Twins, a couple of Bo Pelika and his son Irv, and then Randy Wood. They said, "Hey, come and stay at the house with us." But I didn't know that the black players that were there, they had come to the hotel to meet me so that they could help me take my luggage so that I could live with them. But I told them, well, no, I'm going home I'm going with these guys. I'm gonna stay with these guys. And then spending the night with the friends from home, and then being awakened early the next morning to be able to tell you can't stay here. And having these guys walk me for about 2 miles, carrying my luggage to the house that I had to stay in with the black players, and really crying and not understanding. And I was angry. I mean, really angry. That first year was a little tough for me to ultimately being even belligerent at times and stubborn. I would go into restaurants and get kicked out and walk into places that I wasn't supposed to be in, and was causing a lot of problems that way, and continuing to do that it got to the point that they ultimately, before the season was over, they sent me home early. And they tell them, well, we're going to put you on a AAA roster. They're probably going to send you to Fort Worth, because that's where the Minnesota Twins, whom I had signed with, they had their AAA team. But ultimately, he told me, well, since you go home, you're home, and go back to school. Go check into school. Just said, okay. And later on, finding out that the reason they got me out of town was because the Klan, they were going to hang me. Wow. So, they found this out later on. And as it turned out, being placed on the AAA roster as an unprotected player, after having only played for 2 months of professional baseball, the Boston Red Sox took me in the December draft of unprotected players. And that's how I wound up with the Red Sox as on a major league roster at that time. So it was maybe a blessing in disguise, because it helped me to fast track through the minor leagues and get to the big leagues just that much quicker as a very young player. And from that time on, even after when the Red Sox, where they should have sent me to Class A baseball at that time, they chose to start me as an 18-year-old in Double-A ball in the Eastern League in Reading, Pennsylvania. There, they wanted to keep me out of the South, in which they did. So I was fortunate that way that they at least took care of me, that way of keeping me from having to go back to the South to play, because Lord knows what might have happened at that time.
Oh my God.
With all that I had to experience, and from having your food spit in to couldn't go through a doctor's office. You had to go in the back way and sit in a dirty, dingy area there to get medical treatment. They say what won't kill you makes you stronger. And so to be able to experience that and talk about it, the one thing that I'll never forget, it's, well, Jackie had to experience it, and it was worse for him. But the difference was I had a voice and I could use it, and he made that possible for me to be able to do that, to not have to accept what was wrong, and that whatever you do, like Vince Lombardi said, you don't do the right things sometimes, you do the right things all the time.
Reggie, that's that's just first of all, I appreciate you sharing your journey. That first story when you were 18 and just traveling to a game, and I think of it as an 18-year-old. There can be a naivete. You told your parents things are better. It's not like that. And then encountering that as an 18-year-old and trying to mediate that. I mean, and then how disturbing to be moved because the KKK was going to hang you. I appreciate you sharing that so that we can remember that experience. And knowing you, I appreciate how you pushed back and pushed some of those boundaries and used your voice, and greatly appreciate that.
Well, thank you, and for giving me the opportunity to share that, because I know there are some young players that are getting a little bit of that, but and if they're listening, I just want to know, hey, this is keep your head up and keep pushing and do the things that make you the exceptional person that you are. Because if you look at how many people that in the world play this game of baseball, play this little boy's game, you're that half of 1%. That get that opportunity, and that there's something special about you, and just continue to, again, like you spoke of earlier, take pride in what you do, and that stands for personal responsibility and daily endeavors.
Say that one more time, because I wrote that down. I just want others to actually hear that. It's a powerful acronym.
Whatever you do, take pride in it. PRIDE, personal responsibility in daily endeavors.
Powerful. Reggie, I just want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing with me and all of us, and just how much I admire you as a person. And thank you for sharing your stories today.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me, and being able to be a part of this special time and very memorable moment in time to honor my hero, and that's Jackie Robinson. And thank you for that.
That's beautiful. Reggie, you have a great day. Thank you for being with us. All you that were able to join us, thank you as well. And until we connect again, please be well. Thank you.
All the best. Have a great day.
You too.